Pseudo-intellectualism is everywhere. It's ruining discourse, flooding the internet with overconfident nonsense, and everyone seems to agree it's a plague. But there's a strange paradox. No one ever seems to be the pseudo-intellectual themselves. We can all spot the NPC, but always in someone else. If the condemnation is unanimous, where is all the nonsense coming from? The answer isn't a lack of intelligence, but it's a trap that we are all vulnerable to fall into. If you search the term on YouTube, you'll find hundreds of videos diagnosing it as a cultural disease, the result of NPCs, midwits, and people incapable of critical thought slowly corroding modern discourse. As I watched many of these videos, I found myself emphatically agreeing with most of what was being said, but picked up on an interesting pattern that I thought was worthwhile to discuss. Almost without exception, the problem was framed as individual failure, a lack of intelligence, qualification, or the capacity for nuanced thought. The same language appeared again and again. No original ideas, can't comprehend complexity, just parroting talking points. And unsurprisingly, these critiques were always delivered from the perspective of someone who clearly did not believe they were part of the problem. And that's what struck me as odd. The concern was universal, the condemnation was unanimous, and yet no one seemed to occupy the role of the pseudo-intellectual themselves. Everyone could see the problem everywhere, but always in other people. Now, if you ask me, that seems pretty improbable. But at the same time, none of the videos I watched exemplified pseudo-intellectualism. In fact, I thought they were all very insightful and worth engaging with. So what's going on? Are we really surrounded by an invisible mass of unqualified thinkers poisoning discourse while everyone else remains aware and outspokenly opposed to it? I don't think so. I think this paradox emerges from the way the problem is framed. Pseudo-intellectualism isn't best understood as a group of deficient individuals, but as a product of broader social forces that shape the environments in which intellectual discussion now takes place. Pseudo-intellectualism is a bit of an elusive essence. It's a discernible force with very noticeable effects on the quality of modern discourse, but because it's elusive, the easiest way to describe and talk about it is by making it a caricature, a type of person we're all very familiar with and all loathe. This guy is the epitome of mediocrity but presents himself as enlightened, talks about things he doesn't understand with authority, thoughtlessly dismisses anything he disagrees with without even a moment of serious contemplation. We've all seen this behavior, especially on the internet. It is obnoxious, caustic, and most unfortunately, very contagious. If you stop looking at it as a type of person, but rather a set of unfavorable characteristics, you could recognize that these are traits that could be brought out of the best of us. The problem is that our conversational environments are so degraded that ordinary, decent people begin to behave like petulant, illiterate toddlers. The best example is when people get into big public spats on the internet, but are capable of having civil debate when they come together face to face. Every platform on which intellectual discussions take place is optimized not to create quality, thought-provoking interactions, but addicted zombies that can't get off their phones. The best way to do that is by evoking the absolute worst in us. This much is true in every aspect of online interactions, but my purpose here is to look specifically at the domain of intellectual discourse. To dive deeper, I want to first talk about another significant observation I made when looking into the ongoing discussion about this topic. There are actually two definitions commonly used for this nefarious pseudo-intellectual: those who engage in discourse with lackluster qualifications, and those who engage in discourse without intellectual honesty. Right off the bat, this indicates that even despite widespread acknowledgement of the problem, its true essence is contested to some extent. This first way of framing this caricatured pseudo-intellectual is all about authority. It's a person who purports to be deeply knowledgeable or well-versed in the subject, but really isn't. They don't have the education or credentials to back up their claims, and therein lies the problem. Misinformed non-experts speaking about things they don't understand to an audience of impressionable laypeople. The second definition is more about the manner in which people engage in discussion. People who are closed-minded, dishonest, and arrogant. The problem here is that they consume only what they agree with, dismiss any idea that conflicts with their beliefs without any contemplation, and never consider their own biases or fallibility. To me, it seems like these are two sides of the same coin. Chances are, if you're talking out of your ass about something you don't understand, there's a solid likelihood you're also dishonest and closed-minded. But the main reason I bring up this distinction is because if you look at it strictly one way or the other, you're kind of missing half the problem. And mainly, this objection applies to the first way of defining pseudo-intellectualism, which is in terms of qualification. It is true in principle that only those who are qualified to do something should be doing it. But if we define qualified in very narrow terms, which is often the case, we create another problem. Something that is incredibly common is that qualification is seen as synonymous with formally educated or possessing an advanced degree. This completely ignores the fact that there are innumerable stupid people with advanced degrees and innumerable learned individuals who lack a formal credential. More importantly, it contradicts the foundational ethic that an idea ought to be judged purely on its merit and not by the person who said it. In a similar sense, if we were to only define pseudo-intellectualism in terms of the manner in which people communicate their thoughts, it eliminates the need for ideas to be scrutinized and vetted properly. So yes, pseudo-intellectualism is a problem. We are correct in identifying it as a serious threat to the integrity of discourse and the future of intellectual inquiry in a rapidly evolving internet-based atmosphere, but we should be careful not to hastily define it in narrow terms or use it as a way of classifying a person. Doing this will turn the title pseudo-intellectual into a useless pejorative that only serves to eject people from the conversation outright. Instead, we should recognize it as a behavior, one that is encouraged by the algorithm-ridden social media wasteland that we find ourselves in. We need to talk about what causes this. As mentioned before, most platforms on the internet are incentivized to keep you online for as long as possible. Every single niche of human interest has been eroded as a result. AI, rage bait, bots, and every manner of internet garbage gets magnified because that's what generates the most engagement. Unfortunately, despite having intrinsic resistance to this kind of useless slop, the intellectual space has been infected all the same. A humble but insightful newcomer will go completely ignored, but an abrasive provocateur will climb to heights unimaginable. Thus, so long as we are immersed in this system, we are conditioned to adopt these unfavorable traits and abandon the virtues that are paramount for a healthy investigation of reality. In addition to these clandestine algorithms that subtly and gradually erode the intellectual space, there's a very concrete and easily identifiable shift that has done indescribable damage: short-form video content. The nature of intellectual inquiry requires long, often arduous dissections of profound and nuanced ideas that is simply not possible in these overstimulated, bite-sized chunks of incomplete thoughts that you see on TikTok, Reels, or Shorts. It is not only impossible to articulate an idea in this format, but it removes another pivotal aspect of discourse, which is the actual exchange of ideas. There is no interaction, no dialogue, no conversation, just hurling half-baked thoughts into the void and hoping the algorithm shows it to the masses. This is disgustingly unproductive. I don't want to get too conspiratorial, but you could not convince me that foreign adversaries aren't taking advantage of this hugely popular machine that turns your brain into pulp. Destabilization has always been a part of the geopolitical playbook, and it's never been easier or cheaper to turn an entire population into lobotomized zombies. So just remember, before getting sucked into an internet argument, that the person you're talking to is probably actually a data center thousands of miles away. And even if it was a real person, it'd be a useless exercise that would only exacerbate this problem. Despite how much the current landscape sucks, this is our reality. But to be truly resistant to these forces, we have to look into our own psychology. We all have an authentic thirst for high-level thought, but in the digital space, that thirst is easily hijacked by the allure of appearing smart. We've entered an era where the intellectual aesthetic has become more valuable than the intellectual process. Our ego, our status seeking, and our deep-seated fear of being irrelevant are the raw materials that algorithms use for fuel. They prey on our intellectual vanity. We are incentivized to have an immediate take on complex geopolitical events or cultural movements as soon as they trend. In this environment, silence is seen as arrogance, and nuance is seen as cowardice. The online milieu has turned intelligence into a performative act. It's no longer about the pursuit of truth, it's about the maintenance of an identity. We've traded the slow, messy, and often embarrassing work of learning for the polished, high-definition broadcast of knowing. When sounding smart is more profitable than thinking deeply, it should be a surprise to absolutely nobody that our discourse has become a graveyard of half-baked ideas and borrowed opinions. So how do we fix it? It isn't about deleting our apps or waiting for a better algorithm. The only viable solution is internal. It's the choice to prioritize the intellectual process over the intellectual brand. It requires us to actively keep our egos in check and to be comfortable saying, I don't know enough about that to have an opinion yet. We have to reclaim the virtues of humility and honesty, not as moral platitudes, but as survival strategies. So the next time you see a video titled The Rise of the NPC, or a thread about the death of critical thinking, don't use it as armor to feel superior, use it as a mirror. So before ending this video, I wanted to take a second to talk a little bit about why I chose to make my video about this specific topic, because I think it's actually a really interesting story that kind of highlights a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about here. So obviously I'm a very new YouTuber. I just started my channel like 2 weeks ago, and each video is pretty experimental just to grow my own skills and to try to figure out what works. And in that process, what I learned is that you really have to employ tactics that maximize your algorithmic success. And in doing so, I wanted to explore different resources. And one of the things I found was this interesting resource called vidIQ, which is basically a tool that was developed specifically to help YouTubers with their channels. And it's essentially like an AI chatbot. I'm not a big fan of AI. I try to avoid using it when possible, but I figured it'd be worthwhile to at least experiment with this resource. So I kind of started a query by saying, I'm starting out my channel, I'm making video essays about philosophy and culture, and I'm trying to think of a video idea that will really maximize potential success. And what it told me, it gave me a few ideas, and it said something really interesting, which is that one of the most successful formats is if you basically take a video and frame it as like a diagnostic. So something along the lines of 5 things a stupid person does and how to avoid them, or how to avoid trash philosophy in favor of, you know, the real stuff. And I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but it's basically saying like, make your video diagnosing a problem and proposing a solution that's really targeted as a test of like the viewer's character, basically. And I thought that that was really interesting, because in order to do it, you sort of have to feign authority or, you know, some enlightenment that the average person doesn't have. But I figured it might be worth trying anyway, and specifically on the topic of like pseudo-intellectualism, because that really is a growing problem that a lot of people are talking about, and it's really easy to frame in those terms, like how to avoid being a pseudo-intellectual. So then I kind of asked a follow-up question, which is like, explain in more depth how I could take this idea and make it into like a really successful video. And it was saying, it basically told me to do all of the things that in this video I described as being really harmful, which is like, be super confident, act like you know what you're talking about, use like superlative language, like this is the most important thing, or this is the worst thing, like the antithesis of intellectual humility and intellectual honesty. And I thought it was really interesting because like this is a video that's supposed to be about pseudo-intellectualism, and it's giving me explicit instructions to do the exact things that cause this problem. So I thought that was really interesting, and I thought that basically that gave me the idea to make this video with a bit of a different angle. Instead of talking about like the caricatured pseudo-intellectual, you know, describe the kind of behaviors that are sort of latent within all of us that could exacerbate this problem, basically. And what I ended up doing, I just went on YouTube and looked at a bunch of videos to see what the conversation looks like right now. And that's kind of how I started off the beginning of my script, once I actually started writing it, about like how all of these YouTube videos kind of describe the problem in a way where it's like, this is the type of person that you want to avoid. And yeah, I just thought it was an interesting pattern. So I basically took this alternative approach in response to this really explicit example of how algorithms and the entire machine encourage you to behave in a way that's really unproductive for healthy discourse. So yeah, I thought that was interesting and just wanted to share it at the end of this video. In light of that, because I'm a very new channel and just trying to get this off of the ground, I wanted to share a little bit about like what the kind of purpose of this project is, and really it's related to what this video is talking about, where I want to create a sort of space that promotes the highest level of integrity for intellectual inquiry. So I think what I'm going to try to do, and I'm obviously not perfect, is to create a setting where humility and honesty are just like the paramount principles that everything is built off of. And I want it to be really interactive and conversational. So if you stumble upon this video and it made you think, please leave a comment, and I hope that we can actually, generate some dialogue with these ideas. And if you like this kind of content, please subscribe or stick around and wait for more. So thank you for watching.